Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I want to tell you what happened when I went into the energy of what's known as the Annabelle doll. Supposedly it's a haunted doll which is possessed by a demonic entity. Many people have asked for this, and I think the reason is because a TV host called Dan Rivera, who I think was on Netflix, he was touring the country with the Annabelle doll. And when he arrived in Gettysburg, he died unexpectedly in his hotel room. The coroner said it was natural causes. But obviously, when you're touring with a demonic doll, there are going to be people who go, oh, no, 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 there was something to do with the Annabelle doll that happened. And that's why. So I'm going to take a look at that. I'm also going to see whether there was that kind of connection between Dan Rivera and the Annabelle doll. But it has quite a history to it, apparently. It was discovered in the 1970s because it was given as a gift to a nursing student. And she and her roommate discovered that this doll was weird. It would move about the room, or from room to room. It would cross its own legs. It would leave messages saying, help us, or help me, or something like that. And it really freaked them out. Ultimately, the phenomenon, if it was a phenomenon, obviously we don't know, but the phenomenon was investigated by the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. They were renowned paranormal investigators and demonologists, apparently. They investigated something like 10,000 separate hauntings and brought to light the Amityville Horror, which was obviously made into a series of movies, and the Enfield Poltergeist, which was quite a famous case in its time. Ed and Lorraine Warren started an organization called the New England Society for Psychic Research, and they had their own occult museum. That's where they kept the Annabelle doll, locked up in a cabinet. And eventually, Lorraine Warren, after Ed had died, Lorraine Warren became an advisor to the Conjuring universe, a hugely successful movie franchise that was based on the Warrens' paranormal investigations. And one of the movies was called Annabelle, based on the doll, but they made their own more sinister version, because the original Annabelle was just a Raggedy Ann doll with yarn hair and big round eyes and looked very, very innocent. But over the years, quite a legend has built up around this doll. And it was only increased by the fact that Dan Rivera, who himself had Lorraine Warren as his mentor and was a leading light of the society that she and her husband founded, when he was touring the country, got to Gettysburg, put it on display, the doll, and he died mysteriously in his hotel room while he was on tour. The doll wasn't in the room at the time, apparently, but the coroner said it was natural causes. And so I thought I would take a look at the Annabelle doll energy. That was particularly fascinating, actually, and also whether it had an effect on Dan Rivera. And I don't think he would have minded my doing this, because who is going to be more interested in the results of this energy test than a paranormal investigator who's been into that kind of thing all his life? I mean, he was about 54, I think, when he died, wife and kids, and he spent his life looking into these kind of phenomena. And so what I did was initially I put him alongside the Annabelle doll. There they are. And in his energy, I felt something press against my back. And in that energy, I twisted around like, what was that? What happened? But there was nothing to see. It was simply that I felt something. Now, it's possible that if you invest an object, a place, some kind of location somewhere with enough energy, then you can feel that energy when you're in it. I've done it myself. I've traveled around churches in Europe, feeling the energy of the churches, and the intention that went into the building of the church is still in the stones. So that is definitely true. Recently, I was asked to look into the conflict between Thailand and Cambodia that's been going on over the past few months. They're fighting over a temple, basically, which stands on a promontory on the Cambodian border. It's absolutely stunning, the site. It's a Hindu temple built in the 11th century. It's called Preah Vihear. And when I went into the energy of that temple, it was as if the well of the temple before the statue filled with milk. It just came washing over me and knocked me off my feet. It was so calming and so beautiful, almost blissful. And I take that to mean that that was the intention with which the temple was originally constructed, in a spirit of equanimity and gratitude and awe for the powers of the universe. And that's what got into the stones of the temple. It doesn't matter that it's in ruins now. The original intention is there. So it made me think that if enough people fear an object and tell stories that are fairly evil about it, that energy will attach to the object. And maybe that's what Dan Rivera, I don't know anything about him, but I assume he was kind of sensitive to these forces. That's what he seemed to feel. It was like, what was that? And there was nothing there, but yet there was. It was quite odd. I went into his energy again just to check his crossover in case that had something to do with it. And when I did, I looked down, and it's as if my body was vanishing in chunks, sliding backwards, as if it was made from puzzle pieces and they were being withdrawn. I looked down and I couldn't see my body. My consciousness did not recognize where my physical self was. And this was confusing in that moment. But what was remarkable about him was that in the pictures, he seemed so much at ease with the process, as though this wasn't a mystery to him, as though he already knew how things go, because he went downwards along a shaft, and it was like Mary Poppins floating down from the sky. It was so easy, which is tremendously encouraging. He was obviously a switched-on, tuned-in, very, very intuitive guy. But eventually he ended up in that metaphorical cave that I always see, that most people go to. He wasn't surprised by this either. It was like, whoa, this is so interesting. So this is what's involved. He really was engrossed in the entire process of it. So it's not wrong to call him a paranormal investigator, because this guy really had a curiosity about this and was so interested. He let his curiosity and awe of the process completely overwhelm any minor trepidation he might have had, or even the mystery of it. It was like, oh, okay, now where am I? What is this? When I looked up at the ceiling, it was just, obviously it doesn't exist, it's symbolic, but it was a ceiling of like a cave in the pictures. Nothing remarkable, and yet he seemed to find it remarkable. And when I looked at this through his energy, through his eyes, so to speak, it was like a kaleidoscopic vision. You know when multicoloured balloons are about to be released at a political event or a concert, and they're in netting above the audience, and then they're released and they come down? It was like that moment. Kaleidoscopic. Absolutely entrancing. Had this been somebody else, like a rock star or whatever, I might have said, well, maybe he'd been drinking, or maybe he had taken drugs or something hallucinogenic or whatever that affected his mind and kept him in this state of wonder. But of course I don't know anything about him, so I wouldn't want to say that. But it had that amazing sense of wonder to it that I haven't really seen with other people. There's always a tunnel that leads to the light, and I didn't do his transition, so I didn't follow him all the way up there. But what was so interesting in this crossover was that the tunnel was blocked off. Sometimes that happens when a person has gone before their time, and there's a waiting period in consciousness. But in this particular instance, as ludicrous as this is going to sound, the blockage was made of a substance like, let's just say, cake. A crumbly substance. And before he could pass through this obstacle, he had to dismantle it. That meant grabbing handfuls of it and pulling it down until there was enough room for him to get by. When this happens, usually it relates to an ego investment in something, or prior knowledge which doesn't hold up when it's applied to this process. So it's possible that he had preconceptions about this entire thing that didn't fit in with actual reality, spiritual reality, cosmic reality. They were supposition, they were presumptions. And these needed to be taken apart before he could progress. You need to let go, surrender, yield to actual reality that leads to ascension. And he gradually pulled the wall down. That's as far as I took it. But I didn't feel at any moment that there was a link of causality between the Annabelle doll and Dan Rivera. I may be wrong, but there was definitely something he felt from it, an energy. And I do wonder whether investing an object, or even, I guess, a person or a location or whatever, with fear energy, anxiety energy, dread energy, is enough to make that energy cling. And then this low vibration, low consciousness energy will affect things around it. I suppose that's conceivable. So then I went into the energy of the doll itself. Immediately, my ears went deaf, like it was as though I was wearing earmuffs, or I was trapped in foam or something. And I was flying through it and out the other side. It didn't seem to amount to much. It was just an object. But when I got to the other side, I began falling in darkness, to the point where there was a little passageway of light down below me, and that's where I felt I was heading. But I never got that far, because there were cords attached to my feet and my arms and my body that were pulling me back upwards towards the interior of the building, or where the Annabelle doll was positioned. Which made me think, well, what is this building that it was in? And it was an old orphanage, the National Soldiers Orphans Homestead. It was built in 1836, and it was used to look after the children of soldiers killed in the American Civil War. And it went well for a while, I think. And then at some point, somebody new took over and there was abuse. And terrible things happened to the children. And ultimately, the orphanage was closed in 1877. But that's the energy of that building. And when I went into that energy through the doll, it was very dark. It was like being inside the wall of the building itself, the orphanage. And I went down and down, but I couldn't get out of the building through the little light tunnel. If I tried, it was like being in a microwave and being frazzled and fried. Everything became jagged and difficult, as if the energy, this dark, low consciousness energy, must never be exposed to the daylight. It had to be contained. And the cords, the cables, were pulling me relentlessly back up into the orphanage building and into the doll. It was very peculiar. I was never a great believer, actually, in this paranormal stuff, and it still doesn't interest me greatly. I have friends who are ghost hunters, and they're very rational, practical, down-to-earth people. So I tend to believe that they're experiencing something. My only brush with it was quite a few years ago now. I was sent on assignment in Hollywood to an abandoned movie theatre called The Vogue. It was a weird thing. It was actually falling down, and it was raining that night, so there was rain pouring in, and I think they made us do this at midnight. I think it was a very late thing to enhance the feeling of it being haunted, because it was supposed to be a haunted cinema. And at the back of the stage, where the screen was, there was a passageway off to the left, long and thin and quite claustrophobic. At the end of it was a little room where all the letters for the canopy for the movies that they would show, all those letters individually were stored in piles. And the challenge given to all the people on that tour that night was, can you spend 15 minutes in that room with no lights, no door, no air, other than the air coming in through the passageway? Can you do that? And I think I was the only one who took up the challenge. Maybe there was one other person, but they left early. They didn't see the whole 15 minutes through. But I took up the challenge, and I went down that little passageway with a flashlight, and I sat in this darkened room, and I could hear people moving around the movie theatre. I could hear voices far off as people explored. And I sat there, and I sat there. And I was about to go, my 15 minutes was up and nothing had happened, when somebody blew on my face really hard. Because my hair went back. I had longer hair than my hair went back. Somebody blew on my face. So I went outside and I told the people in the movie theatre what had happened. And the guy leading the group, the investigation, because everybody had these little boxes that they were testing for ghosts with, the guy said, put your hand here. And sure enough, it was a warm night. It was Hollywood. It was a June night, possibly. And you could put your arm out into the warm air, but it would pass through a cold patch about that big. It would suddenly get very, very cold on your arm. And the patch would move if you moved your arm. So it was at a very set position. And the guy said, that's one of the ghosts of the children who died here before the movie theatre was built. It used to be a school. And there was a raging fire one night, and many of the pupils died, and one of the teachers, I think. And their spirits are still in that movie theatre. It's now a church, I think. I think they converted it into a church. But that was my sole experience of that kind of paranormal thing. It doesn't generally attract me, but I did think that was particularly fascinating. And the fact that somebody blew on my face did prove something, because there was no way anybody was anywhere near me, and there was no ventilation or wind or anything that could have affected it. So I thought that was quite spooky and remarkable. But what I think is the solution to the Annabelle doll mystery is that it's the energy attached to it over the years. That would be my guess. That if people go on thinking that it is possessed by spirits or demons or whatever, then it will have an impact on other people who come along and believe that. And the fact that it featured in a movie, albeit a different doll and so on, only enhances the legend and draws more people in. But all of that aside, I still can't explain why in the pictures I had cords attached to my body that were pulling me away from the light and back up into the orphanage and into the doll. Unless it was simply that low vibration energy didn't want to be exposed to high vibration energy, to daylight. However, as far as Dan Rivera goes and his pictures, I would say that although he may have been impacted by the doll's energy, by simply believing in its power, it had no effect on him when it came to his crossing over. He probably did, as the coroner said, die of natural causes. Alrighty, that's all I got. Thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.